The rain fell in relentless sheets, hammering the cracked pavement outside St. Augustine's Hospital in downtown Chicago. Neon lights flickered through the storm, their jagged reflections dancing on the wet streets like fractured promises. Inside the hospital's private wing, a sterile white room pulsed with a quiet, mechanical heartbeat. Machines beeped faintly, their rhythm steady but lifeless, tethered to a young woman lying motionless in a bed draped with crisp linens. Her name was Isabella Voss, the only daughter of billionaire real estate mogul Victor Voss. For 3 months, she'd been locked in a coma, her face pale and serene, untouched by the best doctors money could buy. Specialists from Boston, London, and Berlin had come and gone, their diagnoses as empty as their promises. Outside, in the hospital's shadowed alley, a lone figure stood soaked to the bone, his thin jacket clinging to his frame, no match for the downpour. He was young, barely 16, with sharp eyes that cut through the rain like a blade through fog. His name was Malik Carter, a boy the world had forgotten. But he was about to walk into a storm far worse than the one raging outside. Inside, Victor Voss loomed over the hospital staff like a king surveying a battlefield, his presence commanding and cold. His tailored suit was pristine, every stitch a testament to his wealth, but his face was haggard, etched with grief and fury that no amount of money could erase. His voice, sharp and biting, echoed off the sterile walls. "You're telling me no one can help her?" he barked, his words slicing through the room. The head neurologist, Dr. Evelyn Harper, stood rigid, her clipboard clutched like a shield against his wrath. At 40, she was a woman who'd fought her way into a male-dominated field with sheer intellect, but now her composure wavered. "Mr. Voss, we've consulted every specialist," she said, her voice steady but strained. "Her condition is unprecedented." Victor's eyes narrowed, his fists tightening until his knuckles whitened. "Unprecedented? That's what I pay you to fix." His tone was a whip, cracking through the room, and the nurses flinched, their eyes darting to the floor. The door to the ward creaked open, a slow, deliberate sound that cut through the tension. A security guard stepped in, his broad frame filling the doorway, his expression uneasy. "Sir, there's a kid outside," he said, his voice hesitant, as if he knew the words would ignite a fire. "Says he knows how to wake your daughter." Victor spun around, his face twisting with disbelief, a mix of incredulity and rage. "A kid? What is this, a prank?" The guard shifted his weight, his eyes flicking to Dr. Harper for support. "He's insistent. Says he's seen her case before. But, he's homeless, sir." The room went silent, save for the faint hum of Isabella's machines, their steady rhythm a cruel reminder of time slipping away. Victor's laugh was sharp, a blade of sound that cut through the air. "A homeless kid thinks he can do what the best doctors in the country can't? Bring him in. I want to see this clown." Malik Carter stepped into the room, water dripping from his worn sneakers onto the polished floor, leaving dark, fleeting stains. His thin frame was swallowed by a threadbare jacket, but his eyes, sharp, unyielding, and far too old for his 16 years, locked onto Victor with a quiet defiance. The guards flanked him, their hands hovering near their belts, ready to drag him out at a moment's notice. Victor crossed his arms, his sneer a practiced weapon. "You've got 10 seconds, kid," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Tell me why you're wasting my time." Malik's voice was steady, almost too steady for a boy his age, cutting through the room like a calm wind before a storm. "I can wake her. I know what's wrong with her, and I can prove it." The room froze, the air heavy with disbelief. Dr. Harper's clipboard slipped slightly in her hands, her knuckles whitening. Victor's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of unease, a crack in his armor. What did this kid know that they didn't? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the machines continued their relentless beep, and Malik stood unwavering, a boy against an empire. Malik Carter was a ghost in the city, a black teenager who'd slipped through its cracks like water through a sieve. At 16, he carried himself with a quiet intensity that made people look twice, when they bothered to look at all. His clothes were threadbare, his jeans frayed at the knees, his jacket patched with duct tape that barely held it together. But his eyes burned with something fierce, knowledge hard-won and unyielding. He'd spent years bouncing through foster homes, each one more temporary than the last, teaching himself from library books and stolen moments on public computers. He wasn't just smart, he was brilliant, a self-taught prodigy in neurology, piecing together medical journals like a puzzle no one else could solve. He'd read textbooks under streetlights, memorized studies in the back of shelters, and scribbled notes on napkins when paper was scarce. To the world, he was just another homeless kid, invisible until he forced them to see him. But Malik had learned early that survival meant staying sharp, staying quiet, and never expecting kindness. Yet here he was, standing in a billionaire's world, risking everything for a girl he'd never met, driven by a fire he couldn't explain. Victor Voss was Chicago's untouchable titan, a man who built an empire on steel ambition and a ruthless will to win. At 52, his wealth was matched only by his arrogance, a man who bent the world to his desires. He trusted no one, least of all a kid who smelled like the streets, whose very presence seemed an affront to his carefully curated world. Victor had clawed his way up from nothing, a scrappy kid from the South Side who'd turned grit into gold. Now, he wore his success like armor, his sharp blue eyes cutting through anyone who dared challenge him. But beneath the polished exterior, he was unraveling, a father broken by the sight of high-S daughter lying lifeless. Isabella was his only child, his legacy, the one thing his billions couldn't replace. Her coma was a wound no money could heal, a failure that gnawed at him like a predator. He'd hired the best, Harvard-trained doctors, European specialists, consultants flown in on private jets, but they'd all failed him, their reports piling up like tombstones. Now this boy, this nobody, had the audacity to claim he could succeed where they couldn't. Victor's instinct was to crush him, to send him back to the alley where he belonged. But something in Malik's unflinching gaze held him back, a flicker of doubt that he couldn't shake. Dr. Evelyn Harper was a hospital's top neurologist, a woman who'd fought her way into a male-dominated field with sheer intellect and unrelenting drive. At 40, she was precise, professional, and unflappable, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, her white coat pristine. She'd reviewed Isabella's case 100 times, her team's diagnostics flawless, yet fruitless, a puzzle that refused to yield. The idea that a teenager could know something she didn't was absurd, a blow to her carefully built reputation. Yet Malik's presence rattled her, his calm certainty gnawing at the edges of her skepticism. She glanced at Victor, knowing his temper could end this encounter in seconds, but her scientific curiosity flickered like a candle in a storm. What if the boy wasn't bluffing? What if he saw something her team had missed? The power imbalance was stark. Victor at the pinnacle of wealth and influence, flanked by doctors and security, while Malik stood alone, soaked, dismissed as a vagrant. Yet the room felt charged, as if the air itself knew something was about to shift. Victor's sneer returned, his voice low and venomous. "Prove it, kid, or you're out on the street where you belong." Malik's eyes didn't waver, his silence louder than any response. Malik didn't flinch at Victor's words, his posture steady despite the guards looming at his sides. He reached into his battered backpack, the zipper catching on frayed fabric, and pulled out a crumpled notebook, its pages swollen from the rain, but filled with meticulous handwriting and diagrams drawn in precise, careful lines. "Isabella's coma isn't just neurological," he said, his voice low but firm, cutting to the room like a blade. "It's metabolic. Your doctors missed it because they're looking at the wrong markers." Dr. Harper's brow furrowed. Her professional pride stung, her fingers tightening around her clipboard. "We've run every test, e.g. MRI blood panels," she said, her tone sharp but tinged with unease. "Her vitals are stable." Malik shook his head, flipping to a page in his notebook, his fingers steady despite the dampness. "Stable, sure, but you didn't check her ketone levels properly. Her body's in ketosis, mimicking a coma. It's rare, but it's there. It's been there the whole time." Victor scoffed, stepping closer, his shadow falling over Malik like a storm cloud. "You're telling me you know more than a team of specialists? What are you, some kind of street doctor?" His voice was laced with mockery, but there was a crack in it, a hint of uncertainty. The guards tensed, their hands twitching, ready to move, but Malik didn't back down, his eyes locked on Victor's. "I've read every study on atypical comas," he said, his words sharp, precise, like a surgeon's scalpel. I've seen cases like hers in journals. Undiagnosed metabolic disorders misread as neurological. You're treating the wrong thing and it's keeping her under. Dr. Harper hesitated, her eyes flicking to the monitors, their steady beeps a constant reminder of Isabella's fragile state. Ketosis, she said, almost to herself. We'd have seen signs, weight loss, dehydration. Malik cut her off, his voice calm but unyielding. Not if it's chronic and masked by 4 fluids. Check her beta-hydroxybutyrate levels. Now! The room crackled with tension, the air thick with disbelief and defiance. Victor's face darkened, his patience fraying like a worn rope. This is a waste of time, he snapped, his voice rising. Get him out of here. But Dr. Harper raised a hand, her curiosity outweighing her skepticism, her eyes darting between Malik's notebook and Isabella's monitors. One test, she said, locking eyes with Victor, her voice steady but urgent. If he's wrong, he's gone. Victor's jaw tightened, his fists clenching, but he nodded, his eyes never leaving Malik. Fine, do it. But if this is a stunt, kid, you'll regret it. Malik met his gaze, unflinching, his voice quiet but heavy. I'm not here for you, Mr. Voss. I'm here for her. The words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through the room, and for a moment, even Victor seemed to falter. The nurses moved quickly, their hands steady despite the tension, drawing blood for the test. The wait was agonizing, the room silent, except for the steady beep of Isabella's monitors, each sound a reminder of the stakes. Victor paced, his polished shoes clicking on the floor, his movement sharp and restless, like a caged animal. Dr. Harper stared at Malik's notebook, her fingers tracing his notes, detailed, technical, scarily accurate, written in a hand that belonged to someone far older, far more trained. Where did you learn this? She asked, her voice soft, almost reverent, as if speaking to herself. Malik's response was quiet but heavy, carrying the weight of years spent in the margins. When you got nothing, you learn to take everything you can get. The words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the chasm between his world and theirs, a boy who clawed knowledge from the edges of a city that had turned its back on him. The test results came back faster than expected. The screen flickered into life in Dr. Harper's hands. Her face paled, her eyes widening as she read the numbers. Beta-hydroxybutyrate. It's elevated. Significantly. Victor stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing, his voice sharp with suspicion. What does that mean? Dr. Harper's voice was tight, her words measured but trembling with realization. It means he might be right. Ketosis could explain the persistent coma. We assumed it was neurological because of her head injury, but this changes everything. She turned to Malik, her tone shifting from skepticism to something like respect, her eyes searching his face for answers. How did you know? Malik didn't smile, his expression as steady as ever, but his voice carried a quiet certainty. I read a case study from Johns Hopkins, 2019. Patient had a mild concussion, went into a coma weeks later. Same symptoms. They missed the metabolic issue until it was almost too late. He pulled another page from his notebook, a photocopied journal article annotated in his precise handwriting, the margins filled with notes that spoke of obsession and brilliance. Dr. Harper scanned the article, her eyes darting over the text, her breath catching as she realized its significance. The study was obscure, buried in a niche journal, but it matched Isabella's case with eerie precision. Symptoms, timeline, even the subtle anomalies in her vitals. Victor wasn't convinced, his voice sharp and brittle. So, what? You're saying my daughter starved herself into a coma? She's been on 4 nutrition for months. Malik shook his head, his patience unshaken. It's not starvation. It's a rare disorder. Her body's producing ketones abnormally. You're feeding her glucose, but it's not metabolizing right. Switch her to a ketogenic protocol, and she'll stabilize. Dr. Harper nodded slowly, her mind racing as she pieced it together. We need to adjust her IVs. Star-specific drip is unorthodox, but it tracks with the data. Her voice was steady now, her confidence returning as she saw the path forward. Victor's voice was ice, his eyes boring into Malik. If you're wrong, kid, and anything happens to her. Malik cut him off, his voice steady but sharp, a quiet fire in his words. I'm not wrong, but you're running out of time. The room felt smaller, the stakes higher, the air thick with the weight of what was at stake. Dr. Harper ordered the new protocol, her hand shaking slightly as she gave the instructions, her mind grappling with the possibility that a boy from the streets had seen what her team had missed. Victor stared at Malik, his confidence shaken, his world tilting on its axis. Who was this kid, and how had he walked into their lives with answers no one else had? As the medical team adjusted Isabella's treatment, Malik stayed by the door, his posture rigid but calm, his eyes fixed on the monitors. Victor approached him, his voice low, almost menacing, his polished exterior cracking under the weight of his fear. Who are you, really? No street kid knows this stuff. Malik's eyes flicked up, meeting Victor's with quiet intensity that made the billionaire pause. I'm nobody, Malik said, his voice steady, almost soft, but heavy with truth. Just someone who didn't have the luxury of giving up. He paused, then reached into his backpack, pulling out a worn ID card, its edges frayed but the text still clear. It was from a community college, dated 2 years ago. The name read, Malik Carter, pre-med program, full scholarship. Victor's face froze, his breath catching as he stared at the card. You're a student? He said, his voice faltering, the words sounding foreign in his mouth. Malik's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening with the weight of memory. Got kicked out when my foster home fell apart. Couldn't afford to stay. But I didn't stop learning. Libraries are free. Dr. Harper, overhearing, stepped closer, her voice soft, almost reverent. You taught yourself advanced neurology from libraries? Malik nodded, his expression unreadable, his silence louder than any boast. When you got nothing to lose, you learn fast. The room went quiet, the weight of his words settling over them like dust after a storm. Victor's arrogance cracked, his shoulders slumping slightly, his worldview shaken. He dismissed Malik as a nobody, a nuisance, a clown to be laughed out of the room. But this kid, had outsmarted a team of Ivy League doctors, had seen what no one else could. Dr. Harper stared at the ID, then at Malik, her voice barely above a whisper. You're a genius. Malik didn't respond. He didn't need to. The truth was in the room, undeniable, a force that shifted the balance of power in an instant. Hours passed, the new protocol in place, the medical team working with a quiet urgency. Isabella's monitors began to shift. Subtle changes at first, a slight uptick in her heart rate, a flicker of brain activity where there had been none. Dr. Harper watched the screens, her voice trembling with excitement, her hands gripping the tablet as if it might slip away. She's responding, she said, her voice breaking. My God, she's responding. Victor rushed his daughter's side, his hand gripping hers, his voice raw and desperate. Isabella? Baby. Her fingers twitched, a small movement, barely perceptible, but enough to make Victor choke back a sob, his carefully constructed world crumbling in the face of hope. He turned to Malik, his eyes wet, his voice raw with emotion he couldn't hide. You did this. You saved her. Malik stood still, his face impassive, but his eyes alive with something fierce. Pride, maybe, or relief, a spark that spoke of fire that had carried him through years of darkness. I told you I could, he said, his voice steady, unshaken. Victor's face crumpled, the weight of his earlier scorn crashing down like a wave. I was wrong about you, he said, the words heavy, a billionaire humbling himself before a boy he called a clown. I'm sorry. The apology hung in the air, raw and real, a moment of vulnerability from a man who'd built his life on never bending. Malik stepped forward, his voice calm but cutting, each word deliberate. You didn't see me because you didn't want to. People like me, we're invisible to people like you, but we're still here, and we're not nothing. The words landed like a blow, sharp and true, and Victor flinched, his empire meaningless in the face of this truth. Dr. Harper nodded, her eyes shining with respect, her voice soft but firm. You're not invisible anymore, Malik. The room felt different now. The power flipped, the boy from the street standing taller than the billionaire, his presence filling the space like a storm that had finally broken. By morning, Isabel was awake, her eyes fluttering open, weak but alert, her voice a whisper as she called for her father. Victor wept openly, holding her hand, his shoulders shaking as he murmured her name, the weight of months of fear falling away. The medical team buzzed with awe and relief, their voices a low hum as they checked her vitals, marveling at the miracle in front of them. Dr. Harper pulled strings, ensuring Malik's name was attached to the case. Credit where it was due, a name that would echo through the hospital's halls. She approached him, her expression a mix of gratitude and determination, and offered him a chance to shadow her team, a foot in the door of the medical world that had locked him out for so long. "You belong here," she said, her voice firm, her eyes meeting his with respect he'd rarely seen. Victor, shaking his core, pulled out his checkbook, his hands trembling as he wrote a figure that could change a life. Full ride, any school Malik wanted, no strings attached. But Malik didn't take it immediately, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the check, then at Victor. "I don't want your money," he said, his voice steady, unyielding. "I want a chance to keep learning, to help people like her." Victor nodded, his arrogance replaced by something like gratitude, a humility he hadn't known he could feel. "You'll get it," he said, his voice thick. "Whatever you need." The promise was real, a bridge between their worlds, built on the life of a girl who'd been given back to them. The hospital buzzed with the story. A homeless kid had saved the billionaire's daughter, a tale that spread like wildfire through the staff, the patients, the city beyond. Malik didn't care for the whispers, the curious glances, the murmurs of awe. He'd done what he came to do, and that was enough. As he walked down to Chicago dawn, the rain had stopped, the city gleaming under a new sky, the air crisp and clean. He stood for a moment, his backpack slung over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the horizon. He wasn't invisible anymore, and he never would be again. Malik stood outside, the city waking around him, the hum of traffic and the chatter of early risers filling the air. He thought of the years he'd spent unseen, dismissed, judged by his clothes, his skin, his circumstances. He thought of the nights spent shivering in alleys, the days spent poring over books in libraries that smelled of dust and hope, the moments when he'd wondered if it was all for nothing. But it wasn't. This wasn't just about Isabella, about one life pulled back from the edge. It was about every kid like him, every mind written off because of where they came from, every soul told they didn't belong. The world didn't make room for people like Malik, but he'd carved his own space, line by line, book by book, study by study. Knowledge wasn't just power. It was survival, a weapon he'd wielded to break through the walls that had tried to hold him back. And today, it'd been justice, a quiet triumph that echoed louder than any shout. The narration swelled, cinematic and heavy, a voice that carried the weight of the story. In a world that looks away, one boy refused to be forgotten. He stood in the rain, unseen, unheard, but unbowed, and with nothing but his mind, he changed everything. This wasn't about one life saved, one girl brought back from the edge. It was about every life that could be, every voice that could rise, if only someone would listen. It was about the truth that burns in those the world ignores, a truth that can light up even the darkest corners. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to see it. Subscribe for more stories that remind us the truth doesn't care who's telling it. It waits for those brave enough to speak it.